A rapper, record producer, songwriter, and actor, Eminem has a wide range of talents.
I've been writing lyrics since I was like 14 years old, you know, and just the more I wrote, the better I kept getting at it.
It is widely considered that he is one of the greatest and most influential artists of all time. He has been named King of Hip Hop by Rolling Stone magazine and one of the 100 greatest artists of all time.
What Eminem did was just come out and be such an original artist, you know, in terms of perspective and style.
I still feel like I'm an underground artist, regardless of how many units I sell. The subject matter and the topics that I rap about are still underground.
I mean, in the simplest way to look at it, he made being a white rapper okay. But beyond that, he's really redefined hip-hop.
I tell it like it is, and when you buy a Slim Shady album, you're gonna get Slim Shady.
He released successful albums such as the Slim Shady LP and the Marshall Mathers LP.
I feel like if you want to sue me at this point, just take a number, because there's a lot of people in line.
His legal troubles have been numerous. He is known for his explicit use of words, often sending out aggressive signals.
A rawness and a keen intelligence and a lyricism and a mastery of the English language that few artists, if any, have ever matched, and none will surpass.
Despite that, this rap artist has won the hearts of critics and fans alike, earning more than a dozen Grammy Awards.
People forget that Eminem worked at his use of language.
In terms of like straight up pure skill, he might be the best technician to ever reach that multi-platinum level.
He worked hard to fall in love with language and to find the immense way in which he was able to express himself.
He bases most of his songs on his personal struggles and those of his family members.
I think people appreciated that if you come from a poor background and maybe even your entire life were told that you'd never amount to anything, that's more reason and more motivation to make it. And I can't imagine that there's any rapper in the world who hasn't looked to Eminem and said, if he can do it, I can do it too.
One of the biggest sensations in the rap industry, his albums have all been smash hits.
One of the things that it's important for us all is to belong, to actually belong somewhere and belong to someone. And what defines Eminem's life from day one is that he never belonged anywhere. He was never part of either the family or the community in which he grew up.
Born on October 17, 1972, in St. Joseph, Missouri, Marshall Mathers had an extremely underprivileged and turbulent upbringing. His childhood traumas are a recurring theme throughout his music, and his lyrics paint a dark picture of his early years.
I think the best way to describe his environment is grim. It was poor, it was trailer trash, his words, not mine. It was incredibly an impoverished way to grow up. And as a kid, he was never really like in a stable environment. His mom moved around a lot. You know, she didn't have any sort of like roots that he could hang on to. So I think he was just one of these kids who just ends up being kind of lost as a youngster and not really finding a community that supported him.
You know, at 6 months, his father, Bruce, walks out on him. The abandonment by his father at an early age left him with no male role model, and worse than that, with the sense that the male who was entrusted into whose care he was entrusted, did not think highly enough of him to stick around and make sure he was okay. And that was the first act of abandonment that Marshall had to put up with. You know, his mother is troubled. His grandmother was an alcoholic who was, allegedly abused by her mother, which would be his great-grandmother. So he's got this dysfunctional family he grows up in. He moves as a child. Every few months he's moving from place to place. he's got no stability in his family life, no anchor where he can sit down and say, this is who I am, this is where I live, this is my part of the world. He was deprived of that from an early age, and that had long-term and significant effects, and ultimately drove, you know, his creativity. It's where that genius comes from.
After Bruce Mathers had abandoned the family, it was up to Debbie Mathers to raise the young Marshall as a single parent. It proved to be a tough task, and as a result, their relationship became increasingly volatile.
Anyone who's heard Eminem's music knows his relationship with his mother is very volatile, very violent.
She described herself as an overprotective mother. She described herself as someone who smothered him a bit, perhaps mollycoddled him a bit, and didn't allow him to grow and be a strong, powerful man and be what a male child wants, really, which is go into the world and be a man.
Eminem has never painted a pretty picture of his mom, Debbie Mathers. He's called her a pill popper. He said she was unreliable, that she was never around, that she dated the wrong kind of guys. It was clearly a very difficult relationship that perhaps started out really nicely as when he was a kid because she nurtured him and he was able to discover music partly because his mom allowed him access to that kind of stuff.
It's as if his mother overprotected him. Now, the thing about maternal overprotection, people sometimes say, oh, what a good mother, she is always there for him, always protecting him, always doing this, that and the other. But overprotection is a form of neglect. Every bit as neglectful and more difficult to spot than a mother who very overtly neglects a child and leaves a child screaming in the corner. And what she deprived him of, really, was his power as a boy and his power as a man and his masculinity. And I think that defined so much of his later life.
But in the end, it just seemed like she abandoned her kid, as much as his dad abandoned him when he was 6 months old.
Marshall's exceptionally harsh childhood continued throughout his time at school, where he was bullied and beaten on a regular basis.
A white kid moving around constantly from place to place in black schools, black neighborhoods. He was a victim of kind of reverse racism, where he was the white kid. He was alienated from white kids because he wanted to be a rapper. He was alienated from black kids because he wanted to be a rapper. He was bullied at school. This is not a boy who grows up with a strong sense of his own power, because everybody wants to belong. And the person who's bullied is being told physically and emotionally that you don't belong here. And not only do you not belong here, we are going to punish you simply for who and what you are. And that's what he had to put up with. He was punished and beaten for who and what he was. A small, weak, white kid in a black neighborhood trying to just survive and use whatever he could to survive. And it reached the point where in the famous song he wrote called Brain Damage, where he talks about the guy who literally put him in a coma. 5 days he spent in a coma. It could have killed him. But the beatings didn't stop there. They just carried on. When he recovered from his coma, it just carried on. It wasn't as if he was subject to isolated acts of bullying. It was sustained bullying over an entire childhood, right through his teenage years. And that's difficult, almost crippling for anybody to live with. And let's give him credit here for anybody to deal with what he had to deal with and come out of it as he did, purely for surviving it. Never mind what he did with it and what his creativity did with it, purely for surviving it. He deserves a medal.
Life changed drastically for Marshall in 1988 when Kimberly Scott entered his life. Debbie Mathers had always wanted a daughter, and she jumped at a chance to foster Kim. And Marshall was about to enter into a relationship that would have a hugely significant impact on his life.
When Eminem was 15, she adopted Kim, who was later to become Eminem's wife, and lover, and we know all about how complex that relationship was. And amid these warring women, because Kim and Eminem and Kim and Debbie, everybody was fighting. It was a very turbulent environment. Among all these women fighting, you've got this by Eminem's own admission, he described himself as a child. He said, I was puny, timid. So you have this puny, timid child among these warring women.
Since Bruce Mathers had walked out on Marshall when he was just a baby, his uncle Ronnie was now the only significant male role model in his life, and it was Ronnie who introduced Marshall to hip-hop.
Uncle Ronnie gave him a copy of BC Boy's License to Ill. It's a very easy album for, young white kids to access because it's very much based in rock music, at least musically. And, it's very simple rhymes, very easy to understand.
He was also into like Two Live Crew and, some of the rappers that were coming up in the late 80s and early 90s. And, coming from an urban environment of Detroit, I don't think people really affiliated hip hop with Detroit so much until it exploded in the late 90s. But you could see that the roots to that music were laid much, much earlier in the late 80s and early 90s.
But also, very revealingly, he later said, hip-hop, he said, is about manhood. It's about being macho. And somehow he could see, through entering that world, he could find his masculine power, his male power, his power as a man. It was the only way he could find it and express it. So not only was hip-hop, and not only was his music and his creativity an outlet for him to express himself and to find a way to express this crazy world into which he'd been born and grown up in, it was also his way to find his identity as a man.
Marshall's high school days were unproductive and unsuccessful. After repeating the 9th grade twice, due to truancy and bad grades, Marshall dropped out of high school. He became a fast food chef at Gilbert's Lodge at St. Clair's Shores in Detroit. Life in the Mathers household was tough, and his relationship with Kim was proving to be very unstable. Then in 1991 came the news that would turn Marshall's world upside down.
Bud, this is Ron. Working hard. I'm going to. Well, life's hard, bud.
The man who introduced him to rap, his beloved Uncle Ronnie, took a gun and shot himself. And he shot himself, apparently, after being jilted or dumped by a girlfriend. So again, you have two potential male role models, one who abandoned him when he was only 6 months, then his beloved Uncle Ronnie, who abandoned him by killing himself. And both of them, in some way, shape or form, were led to abandon him through troubled relationships with women. His father abandoned him because he couldn't get on with his mother, Debbie. Uncle Ronnie abandoned him because he killed himself over a woman. And so you have a pattern here. Two significant males, father figures and paternal figures in Eminem's life, disappear as a result of their relationship with women and leave him alone.
And he has an R.I.P. Ronnie tattoo on his arm, and he mentions Ronnie by name in the song Stan as, something that his fans can really relate to.
That's just a harsh reality to deal with no matter who it is. But when it was someone so close to you, it can really mess you up. And I think it really messed up Eminem. But at the same time, it also gave him something to write about, emotions that he needed to get in touch with. And those feelings, I think, turned into some of the greatest raps that we've ever heard.
And that leaves him very much at the mercy of the world. He has no male role model. And the men he grew up with, the boys he grew up with, his peer group was not one in which he could belong. He was a white kid in a black neighborhood. He was a white kid who wanted to be something that both whites and blacks were telling him he couldn't be. So you've got nowhere for him to go. And once a boy loses his male role model, well, then the peer group is the substitute. And what did his peer group do to him? Ostracized him, turned him into an outcast.
Eminem was in a sort of situation where he was constantly struggling. He was struggling at school. He was bullied tremendously. He was struggling to be heard at home. He was struggling to be heard as an artist. People weren't accepting him as a sort of natural hip-hop rapper because he's a white guy. So all of those things came to a head in his teen years.
After he got introduced to License to Ill, hip-hop just became a thing that he did. He put his heart into, like, that was his salvation. Maybe not necessarily seeing it as a way of getting out of Detroit, but, just as a way of dealing with being in Detroit.
They were incredibly formative years because they helped create the superstar rapper that we all know today, and that was all born of those years. But at the same time, it was like it was a constant battle. It was a battle with his own inner demons. It was a battle with people outside, and it was literally physical fights with kids that he knew. So his teenage years were, I would say, rough.
Throughout his teenage years and after the death of his beloved Uncle Ronnie, Eminem continued to focus on hip-hop, a source of escapism that helped him deal with his troubled life. In 1996, Kim gave birth to a baby girl, Haley Jade Scott, and soon after the birth of his daughter, Eminem released his first solo album, Infinite.
As shown in 8 Mile, Eminem had really become battle-tested, quite literally. He would be in battle raps, and he would get a little studio time in Detroit with labels that would just fold about a year later. Nothing really ever came of it, but as time went on, he started to kind of develop his own sort of style. It was still very much based in the old, very much based amongst rappers like, Nas or AZ, and then he did Infinite. And that's really when he started, even back then, he would just say that was him finding his voice. If you listen to, the Slim Shady LP or like even things he did with Royce the 5'9", it's completely different guy, but nonetheless, you can still get a sense of someone finding his artistic voice.
After the release of Infinite, Eminem's personal struggles and abuse of drugs and alcohol culminated in an unsuccessful suicide attempt.
After Infinite was released and flopped, Eminem allegedly tried to commit suicide. And you can see the dynamics of this are pretty straightforward, really. Here you've got a kid who's been deprived of everything a child needs to grow up and be strong. He's been deprived of a nurturing and supportive family. He's been deprived of a peer group to which he can belong. He's been deprived of a home or a city or a town which he feels like he can call his own. And suddenly he has this dream, which is Uncle Ronnie instilled in him from when he was 11, I think, when Uncle Ronnie introduced him to rap. He's had this dream of being a rap artist. And then he releases his album, and then it flops. He's used every available resource he's got left. This puny, timid, bullied child has got to the point where he's lifted himself up and he's found a means to express himself, and it flops. At that point, his world must have caved in. He must have felt as if whatever he did, there was no way out for him from the prison that he felt he was in, the psychological prison that he felt he was in, and that the bars, if you want, that his childhood and his youth had built around him. And at that point, he must have hit absolute despair and thought there is absolutely no way forward for me here. And mercifully for him and for all of us, he didn't succeed, because obviously he went on from there, pulled himself up again, and produced some of the best music of his generation.
After Infinite had flopped, Eminem continued to battle rap his way through the underground scene in Detroit. Slowly, he started to make a name for himself, and his volatile personality was beginning to take over.
He had a reputation, and rightly so, as on the underground battle circuit, where he was determined to make a name for himself, has been highly unpredictable. I mean, there are stories of him diving into the audience once and starting a fight because somebody tried to hit him or somebody had insulted him or whatever it was. It's as if he'd found this vehicle to express himself, and he'd found an outlet for his emotions, for his rage, for his pain, and he'd lost his inhibition. He just was letting himself go.
Traditionally, that's been a way for rappers to make a name for themselves in hip-hop, because, it's one thing to be able to, record in a studio and say interesting stuff that you've written down. But a lot of people think that if you can really come off the top of your head, can really perform before an audience, can make your opponent look bad, then you're a real bona fide rapper.
Eminem's underground success led him on a path to the 1997 Rap Olympics in Los Angeles. His appearance at the Rap Olympics would ultimately set him on his way to superstardom and offer him a chance to collaborate with one of the biggest names in hip-hop.
And that was really sort of like his breakout night, you know? From what I've read, to see him perform live was just something that people hadn't really experienced. Yes, there was Vanilla Ice, and you know, the whole concept of a white rapper wasn't novel.
The battle that launched him into stardom, you know, he was the only white kid.
A lot of people thought he should have won, and his friends did, but he ended up coming in second place. And some of his friends thought that was maybe because he was white.
He was the only white rapper. But one of the black judges was saying at the time, look, just give it this white kid, he's so much better than all the others. Give the award, give the medal to the white kid. He's the winner by a country mile, because he just had this incredible raw talent. And he was head and shoulders above his peers in terms of his artistic creativity.
There was a style, there was an urgency, there was like something way deeper that came out on that night, which got him his record deal.
It came to the attention of Jimmy Iovine at Interscope Records, a hugely influential figure in hip-hop, and Iovine requested a tape of Eminem's. It made the rounds in the office. Iovine loved it. He played it for Dr. Dre. And Dr. Dre was not one to pick a tape up off a slush pile, usually. In fact, he said that Eminem's tape was the first time he'd ever heard an unsolicited tape and said, this is the real deal. I need this kid right now.
And this, if you want, was his way to settle the scores from when the opposite was true of him as a child. When he was the underdog and he couldn't match his peers, he was beaten. When he found his artistic voice, he then became the alpha male. That's the point at which he became the dominant male.
Eminem and Dr. Dre were about to embark on a collaborative journey that would revolutionize hip-hop.
Once I met Dre, it was kind of like I had a vision of where I wanted to take it, and Dre just showed me how to take it there. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we both had the same, like vision for myself, you know, where to take it and whatnot, and Dre just showed me how to execute it.
When you first met, this is a question for both of you, what did you think of each other, honestly?
I thought he was a fucking dick. He probably thought worse of me.
I thought he was Tweety Bird. No, because he had this real bright yellow sweatsuit on.
Man, if I hear one more thing about that goddamn sweatsuit. I had this yellow outfit on when I first met Dre. It was like this outfit that a clothing company had given me, and I didn't have money like some people had at the time. You know, so I was going on a week wearing it, so it was actually turning kind of green. But he called me a banana when he met me, so it was on from there.
Eminem had been working on creating an alter ego that would allow him to express his dark side. And not long after he teamed up with Dr. Dre, Slim Shady was born.
You know, the whole concept of alter egos is not foreign to hip-hop, and a lot of rappers have taken on these other identities to basically say what they really want to say.
You've talked before about having 3 different personas, Eminem, Slim Shady, Marshall Mathers. Could you briefly tell us where one stops and the other one begins, and the difference between the 3 different characters?
Marshall Mathers stops when the Bacardi kicks in, and then it's Slim Shady. Eminem starts when I hit the stage, so it's the best way I know how to answer that.
Through Slim Shady, he found a voice through which he could express anger and emotion and pain that was authentically his.
Slim Shady allowed Eminem to, I guess, kind of get a little bit of distance and take more chances in terms of like what, you know, his subject matter, in terms of talking about what was going on in his life.
Eminem really made an art out of it. He took feelings that were his own, put them into a caricature, and put them out to the world, so that if they infuriated you, you weren't necessarily mad at Marshall Mathers. You were mad at Slim Shady.
I don't try to, you know, polish up my shit for nobody. I don't, you know, I tell it like it is. And when you buy a Slim Shady album, you're going to get Slim Shady. You're not going to get birds and bees and flowers and trees.
Every man, every woman at some point has violent fantasies. What people made the mistake with Eminem, when they listen to his voice, as it's expressed through Slim Shady, they think he's saying something that is literally true, or that he's literally going to do. What he is doing there, it's a vehicle. Slim Shady is a vehicle for emotions that he feels he hasn't been able to express, and that there's no legitimate way for him to express them. That's where his anger comes out. That's where his rage comes out.
Slim Shady just allowed him to, I guess, play fast and loose with his own experience as well as subject matter.
I believe the things that I say are controversial. Me is just speaking my mind. So speaking my mind and telling it like it is makes me controversial, then whatever. I say whatever on my mind, you know. But I had a good teacher, you know.
And it was a very smart move, I think, just in terms of marketing, in terms of the criticism that he probably inevitably knew would come his way, because it just gave him that out, the alter ego out. That's kind of the way I always saw Slim Shady, as this caricature that Eminem invented.
This is a man who, for all the abuse he suffered at the hands of his family, abuse of one sort or another, and certainly the violence he suffered and bullying he suffered at the sense of his peers, he didn't identify with the aggressor. He identified with the victim. He identified with those people who were the underdogs. He identified with those people who suffer. He identified with those people who are in pain. And through his alter egos, he is simply expressing the impotent, unexpressed rage and pain of the underdog, not something he was literally going to do.
The Slim Shady LP was released on February 23, 1999, under Interscope Records and Dr. Dre's Aftermath Entertainment. The majority of the record's lyrical content was written from the perspective of Eminem's alter ego, Slim Shady. The album was noted for its over-the-top depictions of violence and heavy use of profanity.
Slim Shady LP sold 3 million copies by the time the year was out. It was a huge success, especially for a first full-length album.
And it really defined Eminem as a force to be reckoned with in terms of introducing all his crazy new characters, his crazy rhyme schemes, his funny allusions, his pop culture references, the stuff about his mother, his wife Kim. It really defined who he was, and it's an album that still holds up. The production from Dr. Dre is really interesting and fun. In a lot of ways, it doesn't sound like a traditional hip-hop album. It sounds like something that's more mainstream almost, something that crosses over to kids who might not have grown up with hard street rhymes.
You know, I remember hearing it and thinking it was fun. It was dark, but it had a sense of humor to it. It had like a sort of wink to it.
You know, just kind of a personal side, I remember, you know, watching MTV. It must have been like 2 or 3 in the morning. I was home from college, and they showed the video for My Name Is, and, you know, the first thing's like, okay, what's this guy? This guy's name's Eminem. Okay, he's a white guy. Like, Dr. Dre's in this video. Like, it's just like one of those moments where you just remember exactly where you were when you first see it. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know if I like this or not, but this guy is going to be huge.
My name is what? My name is what? My name is my name is what? Excuse me. My name is Can I have the attention of the class for 1 second? My name is Hi kids, do you like Primus? Wanna see me stick 9-inch nails to each one of my eyelids? Wanna copy me and do exactly like I did? Try this to get messed up worse than my life is? My brain's dead weight. I'm trying to get my head straight.
Yeah, when My Name Is blew up, I didn't know exactly what it was going to do. I mean, this was my first time, you know, actually doing this or whatever. It was my first time exposed to the public, and I never considered myself anything more than an underground artist. You know what I'm saying? Just because of the subject matters I talk about and the way that I rap or whatever, the things that I talk about, I thought, you know, I was surprised, to be honest.
Were you surprised?
No.
Next.
Visually, musically, in any aspect, unlike anything I had ever seen before. And, you know, that was a perfect calling card because, like, you know, when Dr. Dre's, you know, discovered Snoop Dogg, Snoop's first single was What's My Name? So you kind of got to see the parallel there where My Name Is, you know, it's just a way of introducing himself.
And in My Name Is, Eminem or Marshall, Slim Shady, whoever you want him to be, again, is playing with the idea of his identity. Who is he? who is the real Marshall Mathers? Who is the real Eminem? Who is the real Slim Shady? It's a provocation to people. He's provoking his audience and saying, who do you say I am? And really, there's something almost quite biblical about this, because there's a very famous scene in the New Testament where Jesus says to his disciples, well, who do you say I am? And he's playing with the same thing. Who do you say I am? Who do you think I am? And he's provoking people into really confessing and admitting something about themselves and challenging them to see themselves in the way that they see him. And it's a wonderful, and only the greatest artists can do that. And Eminem plays the same game, and he does it to perfection.
Even though it spawned a couple of huge hits, Guilty Conscience, in its own ways, a little bit as gimmicky as My Name Is, but it also had Role Model, which I think was more in tune with the tone Slim Shady LP had. The one thing that struck out to me is how lonely it is. Like, Royce the 5'9" is pretty much the only guest on that. This was just, for the most part, 1 or 2 or 3 guys producing, most notably Dr. Dre. And a complete, they put all their chips on the table thinking that Eminem, in and of himself, was going to be a star. And of course they were right. It sold about 5 million copies incredibly quickly and, got him the Rolling Stone cover. And by the turn of the century, you could argue that even before Marshall Mathers LP, he was not only the biggest rapper, but one of the upper echelon of just musicians, like pop stars as a whole.
And it made a huge impact on music journalists. I remember that. It was sort of like eye-opening. Like, oh, wait, there's a hip-hop culture and scene coming out of Detroit that we should pay attention to, It was sort of unexpected. It really came at a very unexpected time. Grunge was already in the past, and I feel like the music industry was struggling to find a voice for the millennium, which ended up being rap rock. Eminem is a huge part of that, and the reason it became popular.
Just a year after the release of the Slim Shady LP, Eminem released arguably his greatest album, the Marshall Mathers LP. The album featured more introspective lyricism, including Eminem's response to his sudden rise to fame and the controversy surrounding his lyrics.
This is a question for Eminem. I was just wondering, which issue has been the most important for you to address in the new album, and how did you do it?
Which issue?
Yeah.
Critics would probably be the most talked about issue that I'm discussing on this album, along with I say some things about some boy-girl groups and some other things about some other people, whether they deserved it or not. In my book they do, if they're corny. So I brought it to a lot of sissies basically on this album, and critics who had things to say about me and didn't quite understand my lyrics last time around, and took everything that I said literally. So, basically I'm addressing a lot of critics, and I got pretty personal on this album too, That's why the album is called the Marshall Mathers LP.
How did you deal with the critics on the album?
How do I deal with the critics? You have to get the album and see. You might be mad.
Was that always going to be the concept of the record, the Marshall Mathers LP, when you first laid down the first rhyme and did the first beat? Was that always going to be what it was going to be called and how it was going to move?
Nah, I was juggling some titles around. At first I was juggling around a title called Amsterdam because I wrote 4 songs in 2 days when I was in Amsterdam. But basically once I started writing the songs and, seeing which direction the album was going, it just got more personal and more personal. And, I love the media. I thank God for the media because you guys give me shit to talk about. If it wasn't for y'all, I probably would have left to talk about, so.
Really rounded out Eminem's persona and sort of defined him as a heavyweight rapper. It was the album, not only did it sell well, not only was it popular with average listeners, but it delved into some really sort of deep, meaty issues.
I consider myself a perfectionist, and I always want to try to top my last, not just album, but try to top my last song that I did. So you might hear the gradual build-up on this album from one song to the next. Every time I sit down and write a rhyme or a song, I want it to be completely different from the last song I wrote, and I want the rhyme style to be completely different, the beat to be different, so, you know, you might hear that on this album.
And the song that comes to mind is Stan, and it's a three-part tragedy that has a real climax and really defined Eminem as someone who could tell interesting stories, and he wasn't just about jokes, he wasn't just about making fun of his mom. He was a guy who had a lot of substance.
The song's not so much about Stan, the fan. It's actually about Eminem and the complex world in which he lives, in which people find their identities by transferring all sorts of feelings and emotions onto him to try and make sense of their own lives, just as then he is struggling with his, and the sense that his life is out of control because he can't control what people are making of him. He can't control what people are saying about him. He can't control what people believe him to be. And that's what that message is. And the end of Stan, where he finally, writes back to Stan and says, "Look, I'm sorry I'm so late in writing back, but of course it's too late because at this point Stan has killed himself and his wife and his unborn child." It shows a kind of desperation really from Eminem, as if, what can I do? I can never ever give these people what they want, and they will make of me what they will. Am I responsible for that? It's a song of immense lyrical beauty, of musical beauty, and really captures the essence, not just of what it is to be a celebrity, but more particularly of what it is to be Eminem and the complex world which he created and which he has to live with.
And he took a lot of criticism for his homophobia, for his violence in his songs, particularly against his wife, and, his threats to his mother. But at the end of the day, you got a sense that he was really speaking from the heart on all these things, that these were things that he was really feeling, that these experiences came from a really deep place inside of him, and that the album was a type of therapy.
The album spawned many hits, but the lead single was titled The Real Slim Shady. The video features Eminem performing the song in a psychiatric ward, a local Detroit neighborhood, a fast food joint, the Grammy Awards, and even a factory where multiple clones of the rapper are produced.
Will the real Slim Shady please stand up? We're gonna have a problem here. Y'all act like you never seen a white person before. Jaws all on the floor like Pam, like Tommy just burst in the door and started whooping her ass worse than before. They first were divorced, sewing her over furniture. It's the return of the... Oh, wait, no, wait, you're kidding. He didn't just say what I think he did he? And Dr. Dre said... Nothing, you idiots. Dr. Dre's dead. He's locked in my basement. Feminist women love Eminem. Chicka, Slim Shady. I'm sick of him. Look at him walking around grabbing his you-know-what.
It's called The Real Slim Shady. It's basically the chorus is saying, "Will the real Slim Shady please stand up?" And basically what the whole song, the concept of the whole song was about was, trying to say that there's a Slim Shady in all of us. Everybody has a shady side to him. So in the video, I'm asking, will the real Slim Shady please stand up? And everybody's standing up in the video because everybody's got a Slim Shady in them. I said that a long time ago when I came out with my first album. I feel like everybody has a shady side to them, and a side to them where they can be an asshole, and Slim Shady is that asshole inside of me that comes out an awful lot.
Marshall Mathers came in at 1.76 million in a week. I mean, those are like astronomical figures, and if anyone had any doubt as to his star power or where Eminem could potentially go as an artist, the Marshall Mathers LP kind of cemented the fact that he's here to stay.
At this point, Eminem has released 2 groundbreaking albums, and along with the success came an onslaught of criticism.
And, the obvious problem with Marshall Mathers LP is that it had some very controversial things to say about the homosexual community.
He was courting a lot of controversy. People were, claiming that he was homophobic, that his lyrics were misogynistic, that, that he was really like a blight on music, on pop music. And to sort of combat all that negativity, he did what people really just did not expect, which is he performed with Elton John on the Grammys. Now, he'd been like a Grammy favorite for a few years now. He's always up for Best Rap Album. He won almost every time. And this was like his official sort of entry to mainstream music world. And at the end of the performance, which was, you know, Stan and had Elton John on the piano, they hugged. And it was written that it was the hug felt around the world. You know, it was such a huge moment for music. Because it brought together these two completely disparate worlds.
2002 would prove to be another memorable year for Eminem. He released his third major album, The Eminem Show, and it soon became another multi-platinum release.
The Eminem Show was another huge blockbuster for Eminem, and it sort of got even further away from the traditional hip-hop roots that he had.
You know, Eminem had been pretty steadily releasing albums every 18 months, 2 years, and it was like every single one was bigger than the last. And the Eminem Show was just another example of how much of a force he was in music at the time. It was the best-selling album of 2002. Nothing even came close.
Without Me was another one of Eminem's kind of lead-off, jokey, pop culture referencing singles, and it was also really successful. And it sort of picked its targets to make fun of, and it had another really infectious, bouncy pop mainstream beat, and it sort of set the tone for the Eminem Show.
There's a line in the song that makes perfect sense, which is, guess who's back, you know? It's like all he had to do was, at this time, just come back and do what he does best, without having to change up the formula too much. You know, he didn't have to diverge. He didn't have to wow. He didn't have to even show that there was so much of an evolution. At the time, it was like people wanted that Eminem, the Marshall Mathers Eminem, the Eminem Show Eminem. He was giving people what they want with this album, which I think is why it sold so well.
That same year, Eminem would transfer his skills to the big screen. He starred in a motion picture that was loosely based on his own life, and it was an incredible acting debut for the rap superstar.
We were talking about doing a movie about, you know, based on my life or whatever, you know, something like that.
In that movie, you see Eminem, no holds barred, expressing his feelings, his emotions, in a world where so many celebrities try to whitewash themselves. They try to project an image to the world of something that's kind of all American, all apple pie, all sweetness and light. This was a guy who stripped his life to the bone and said to the world, this is who I am, deal with it. He did it in his music, and in 8 Mile, he showed not just his skill as an actor, but his ability as an actor to get the guts of his personality out and to express it on screen in a performance that any actor would have been proud to call their own.
I think what he did was prove that he couldn't be put in a box. You know, as much as we could say, like, oh, well, Eminem does this and he does it really well and he's funny and he's, you know, witty and he gets the concept of music videos and he really draws people in. Well, this was another side of him that was much more nuanced, that took talent that people didn't realize he had. It was just an amazing experience, I think, for Eminem and for the viewers and for people at home who didn't have an appreciation of all that he could do. 8 Mile really, really stepped it up.
The film was accompanied by an award-winning soundtrack, which contained the single that's seen by many as the quintessential Eminem song.
The enduring legacy of 8 Mile might be the song Lose Yourself, which ended up being the first rap song to win an Oscar.
The music video was filmed in Detroit and contains many scenes from the movie. It also features Eminem rapping next to the 8 Mile Road mobile court sign that appears in the movie and also on the cover of the movie's soundtrack.
Yo. His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already. Mom's spaghetti, he's nervous, but on the surface he looks calm and ready to drop bombs. But he keeps on forgetting what he wrote down. The whole crowd goes so loud, he opens his mouth, but the words won't come out. He's choking how? Everybody's choking now. The clock's run out, time's up, over, loud. Snap back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, there goes gravity. Choke, he's so mad.
And in any case, 8 Mile really helped bring Eminem to an even wider audience because the film was seen by lots of people who don't necessarily listen to rap music, but they got a chance to get inside his story and to learn what he was all about, and it pretty much made him bigger than he ever was.
After 8 Mile had grossed millions at the box office, Eminem was back in the studio recording his 4th major studio album. Encore was released in 2004. The album proved to be Eminem's least popular to date, with fans and critics noting the subpar quality of the lyrics compared to previous Eminem albums.
You know, the question that was left unanswered by the Eminem Show, and even 8 Mile to a large extent, was where was Eminem, the rapper, going to take things? And Encore is, I guess, where people found out. You know, Encore was the first record Eminem made that didn't explicitly say who it was from the perspective of.
It started to feel like Eminem was a caricature of himself. You know, it was becoming repetitive. It didn't seem novel anymore. And his rhymes were really simplistic. That was a big criticism that a lot of music reviewers had. So it's not like it's a terrible album or the songs weren't that good. It just felt a little bit like a parody, like a cliche. And Eminem, who was always so ahead of the curve and so like out of left field and forward thinking and trailblazer in so many ways, this felt like he was following himself.
You know, the first single Eminem released from that album was Just Lose It. This one made light of Michael Jackson's problems, you know, with, you know, child molestation, legal troubles, his health. And that was, oddly enough, the one time where people said maybe Eminem went a little too far. Maybe not even in terms of controversy, but just being in poor taste.
The way it made fun of his, you know, alleged pedophilia and all that. And Encore is also known for the song Mosh, which got really political. It was at the time when John Kerry was facing George Bush in the presidential election, and it took a strong stance against Bush and encouraged his fans to vote. And these were people that might not necessarily have been political. But, you know, John Kerry lost. The album didn't sell as well as Eminem's albums traditionally do. And more than anything, it was seen as creatively not quite up to par with his other stuff. And he subsequently took a long hiatus.
In 2005, many industry insiders started to speculate that Eminem was considering ending his rap career after 6 years and several multi-platinum albums.
Because when Encore came out and it wasn't received so well, it felt like almost like recycled music. I think Eminem maybe realized that he needed to step back and he needed to take some time off. At the same time, he was also struggling with addiction.
As you would expect, not just for somebody in Eminem's world, but for somebody with Eminem's personal history, that at some point along the line, addiction to something would come into it. Alcohol was present. Allegedly, all sorts of illegal drugs were present. And most famously, prescription drugs were present. But what's important to remember is that most addictions start from feelings of abandonment, feelings of rage, feelings of shame, and that's the root of those addictions. The particular ways that those addictions find expression, the particular drug of choice, if you want, well, that's just down to chance and circumstance most of the time. And with him, he chose prescription drugs, but it could just as easily have been anything else.
And he was having trouble sleeping, and he was having trouble functioning. He actually had to cancel an entire European tour during this hiatus between 2005 and 2008.
He said that he was at a really low personal point. There were a lot of things going on in his personal life that he didn't really talk about. He remarried his wife, Kim, and then divorced her within a year. And he also saw the death of his best friend, Proof, and that had this huge impact on him as well. And kind of coming out of drug addiction made it even harder.
But I think it was a time to sort of reassess his life, where he'd come and where he could go. And I also think it was a very important time for family.
So he went to rehab, he sobered up, and the way he describes it is that he poured all his energy into hip-hop, and rapping became his new drug and helped him get through it.
And I think that maybe he had to reconcile a little bit of where he came from and where he was, you know, at the moment. But I will give him props. You know, Eminem could have moved to LA. He could have just, like, you know, been hanging out with Dre every day, but he stayed in Michigan, which I think was really important to sort of keep him grounded, but literally keep him grounded, because he was flying high between, you know, the boasting and the people kissing your ass and the drug addiction. You know, he was living in a reality that wasn't real. So I think that that's what that 3-year hiatus really did. I think it sobered him up in every way.
In 2007, Eminem purchased the Effigy Studio in Michigan and started the initial recording process of his next album, Relapse. Once again, Eminem worked alongside Dr. Dre, and after 2 years of studio time, the album was ready for release in 2009.
You know, 2009 was the first legitimate Eminem record we heard since, you know, Encore. And it was a kind of shocking to hear, you know, where Eminem was at that point, because his hiatus was really shrouded in mystery. You know, obviously rumors spread about drug addiction and Lord knows what else. And Relapse was an album that just went ahead and took that stuff, you know, head first. It was, you know, arguably more shocking than anything he did on the Slim Shady LP 10 years prior, because the world had changed a lot, you know, in 2009. People had become a lot more desensitized to shock, you know, to shock tactics and, you know, hip hop pushing boundaries. And I mean, Relapse, you know, showing he was, you know, taking pills, like, you know, once again, killing people on record. Christopher Reeve again, you know, going at Mariah Carey, going at Nick Cannon. And whether it's up for debate whether it was as good as his earlier work, nonetheless, you know, the public welcomed him with open arms. It sold incredibly well. Mixed reviews, I'd say, but nonetheless, it was, you know, people were happy to hear Eminem doing that kind of Slim Shady sort of thing instead of, you know, the kind of stone sober, like, political stuff that he was kind of hinting towards on Encore.
Relapse was considered a successful comeback for Eminem, but it wasn't until the release of his next album, Recovery, that fans and critics saw Eminem back to his free-flowing best.
And in fact, Recovery was the best-selling album of 2010 in any genre, and it really resonated with people because I think Eminem did what he does well, and it was speaking from the heart and sort of talking about where he really was in his life at that moment and not trying to put on airs or try to be something that he wasn't.
Not Afraid was it's a recovery song, like, more than anything. It's the call of somebody who has just survived substance abuse and probably could have died or may have killed himself. And Not Afraid is about tackling all those things. It's about facing it head on and getting through it.
You can try and read my lyrics off of this paper before I lay them, but you won't take the sting out these words before I say them. Cause ain't no way I'm gonna let you stop me from causing mayhem. When I say I'm gonna do something, I do it. I don't give a damn what you think. I'm doing this for me. So the world feed it beans. It's gassed up. Everything's just stopping me. I'ma be what I set out to be, without a doubt, undoubtedly. And all those who look down on me, I'm tearing down your balcony. No ifs, ands, or buts. Don't try to ask him why, how can he? From Infinite down to the last Relapse album, he still.
The video was really powerful too because it didn't rely on gimmicks. It was just Eminem singing, not even rapping so much, singing, you know, something that felt so true and so honest and so vulnerable. That's how I see Not Afraid, as a very, like, vulnerable but at the same time strong song.
Love the Way You Lie was a really it was kind of a bold move because Rihanna was on that song as well, and Rihanna had gone through her own thing with a very abusive relationship. You know, you could kind of see the parallels between Rihanna and Chris Brown, as well as Eminem and Kim Mathers. You know, both very high profile, lots of violence, lots of us, you know, lots of dirty laundry being aired. And I guess by coming together, those two kind of showed a little bit of kinship.
Who's that dude? I don't even know his name. I laid hands on him. I never stoop so low again. I guess I don't know my own strength. Just gonna stand there and hear me cry. That's alright, because I love the way you lie. I love the way you lie.
The video for Love the Way You Lie features Megan Fox, and a lot of people thought that it was a very realistic, almost film cinematic quality to it. and it features a young couple who are in this really abusive relationship, but they clearly love each other, and it ends with the house going up in flames, and people thought it was an artistic step forward for Eminem.
With Recovery, Eminem achieved the record for most successive U.S. #1 albums by a solo artist. It was an incredible feat and proved that his troubled times were behind him. He was once again ready to regain his tag as the king of hip-hop. On May 24, 2012, Eminem revealed that he'd begun working on his next album. Shady Records president Paul Rosenberg told Billboard that Eminem's 8th studio album would be released after Memorial Day 2013. Rumors were circulating regarding the name of the new album, and in mid-2013, it was announced that the album would be titled The Marshall Mathers LP 2. The album was already one of the most anticipated albums of the year, but when the title was released, the anticipation grew even further. The lead single from the album was titled Berserk and was released on August 27, 2013. The music video was filmed in Brooklyn, New York. It features cameo appearances by fellow rappers Kendrick Lamar and Kid Rock. The video also features Eminem rapping in front of a huge cassette tape player, as well as short clips of the official music video of Billy Squier's The Stroke, which is heavily sampled in the song.
Now this about to kick off, this party looks wet. Let's take it back to straight hip-hop and start it from scratch. I'm about to bloody this jack up, everybody get back. That's why my pin needs a pad, cause my rhyme's on the red tag. It's like I did with addiction, I'm about to like a magician, critics I turn up. Got them still on the fence, weathered up. But quick to get impaled when I tell them. So sick, I'm looking pale, well that's my about to go ham. Yeah, bitch, shout out to me.
The album received generally positive reviews from music critics, with praise going to Eminem's technical rapping skill and production choices. It debuted at #1 on the U.S. Billboard 200 and had the second highest album sales of 2013. That year, Eminem also went on to win Artist of the Year at the YouTube Awards.
Yeah, man, I just want to say real quick, man, thank you to all the fans, everybody who voted. Thanks to YouTube. Thanks everybody for coming out, man. I'm out.
One of the few rappers to balance style with substance in 20 years and 15 in the spotlight is Eminem. Over the years, Marshall Mathers has developed so many unique skills that make MCs great, especially in the eyes of specialized pockets of fans. Using innovative songwriting and top industry resources, Eminem reminded some fans that rap can still be unpredictable. Others considered Eminem to be the epitome of a music video star. Stan and My Name Is were executed brilliantly. It was Walkman-era rap at its finest. Presumably, Eminem was many fans' first great MC. He rapped and raps amazingly on platforms where skills are not often celebrated. More than that, through his real hits, his high-profile circumstances and feuds, and his first-person narrative, Eminem is an artist so many people feel like they know, and he's still recording, arguably, as well as he has in the last decade.
Eminem's legacy, and what people will remember Eminem for, is what it's possible for people to create and for someone to create, irrespective of their circumstance. If they're prepared to look at their lives with an honesty and a rawness, and prepared to work hard.
When you talk about all time, he's definitely one of the best rappers ever. One of the biggest rappers ever.
But above all, people will remember him for his artistic genius. And genius is not a word I use lightly here.
I mean, in the simplest way to look at it, he made being a white rapper okay. It's impossible to copy. You can't clone that guy. You can't be a derivative white rapper. No one can even touch the guy. And that's what's most impressive. Yes, he sold millions of albums. Yes, he's incredibly well known and he can't walk down the street and, you know, people are constantly coming up to him for autographs and stuff. But beyond that, he actually touched a chord. You know, he's incredibly inspirational in that sense.
In a world of manufactured pop and manufactured rock, this was a true artist, and that's what he will be remembered for.
I think if Eminem were to retire at this point, he would be in a short list for the greatest rappers ever.
And the thing about true artists is they don't lose their creativity. They simply morph as they get older. The older he gets, the more his talent and his artistic creativity will ripen, mature, and change and morph into something else.
I think that really culturally he changed hip-hop in ways that are even more significant. He sort of opened it up not just for white rappers, but for a whole sort of demographic that hadn't necessarily been interested in hip-hop before.
One thing you can be sure of, we will be hearing about Eminem, and he will be creating until the day he dies, and what he creates will always be worth listening to, always be worth watching, and always be worth talking about.